time to rejoin the conversation. And we are back, and okay, here we go. Normally I'd say party politics, but today, Martin Luther King, his legacy, how far we've come, and how far we gotta go. So, of course, today out there in podcast land, just so you know, we're recording on Martin Luther King Day, which is, of course, the reason that we want to talk about Martin Luther King. But something happened last week that made me think about Martin Luther King Day coming, and it made me think about how far we have to come. I definitely don't want to spend a ton of time talking about this in particular individual, but with a certain someone saying phrases like not letting immigrants in from shithole countries, and all of these shithole countries seem to be countries where black people come from, made me wonder, how far have we come? Even though I know we've come a long way. So I guess first, let's go around the table and just touch on maybe one or two things in your mind that are kind of touchstones of how far we've come. And then we'll go back around the table and talk about the other. You know what? We've been starting with Adrian. Let's keep going.
Yeah, I say we definitely have come a long way. I mean, I look at my grandmother, 81 years old, live kicking, Southeast Georgia, and may have a second grade education. And, you know, to be in a position to where, you know, we're being thankful. I'm thankful for being able to start my own organization, and she can barely read. You know, in her lifetime, to see the things that she's seen, I can't. I have no complaints in comparison. So we've come a long way in that aspect.
Yeah. Brain mass.
That's a hard question to be from my perspective. I mean, it's hard to answer that one. I think. All I can think of is as a kid, growing up, we never thought about, in my household, we never thought about race or the things that happen with that, which is not necessarily a good thing either, I don't think, meaning that, you know, it's important to talk about it, but it never made sense to me when people weren't treated all the same. And and I think back on it now, I think that's kind of, I mean, that is awesome, right? It's awesome to be in a household that is just, hey, I don't understand this, and like, why are people treated differently? And to me, I think that's a long way for my family to come, because when I think back, one of my grandparents I'll be honest, was racist, and it was like it clicked. Like when you start to recognize those types of behaviors as you get older, you kind of look and see almost a divide in your family, and it's like, hey, I only see these people when it's a family reunion every couple of years, and it's things like that where you think, I'm glad my immediate family has gotten away from that, and that's right. Progress. And it's an unfortunate truth that I think a lot of times also society would rather ignore.
That's definitely a tip of the hat to Mama Massey, because, coming up in it's funny, one of my best friends met the anonymous female, and for the first time, and he was just like, his first impression of Missouri, he came to visit me. I've been here now 12 years, so this is first or second year, and probably first year. And this is when the Empire Room was still kicking, right? And so he's trying to find a place to go. He's a super hip hop head. He wants to go out. I'm trying to tell him it really isn't that kind of town, but there's a couple of clubs you might like. And so he's looking at the pitch. He sees, oh, this Empire Room looks like this might be all right. And then he reads the following phrase. Yeah, I will never forget it because I was stunned. With its unabashed racial mingling was actually in the ad in the pitch. He actually cut that out. He still has it on his wall at home in Seattle because he could not believe. So the next time he comes, he meets, female. He's like, how did you grow up not racist? Because his first thought of Missouri is the ad for the club. But it was the same thing. Like, she grew up in a house where that just wasn't a thing. It was not a topic of discussion. They didn't talk about people one way or the other. It wasn't even like they didn't talk about race. They just didn't talk about people in those types of terms. And that is definitely a testament when, coming from, families that, you could have easily, just to get along with the other side of the family, you could have, gone along with whatever it is that they were talking about. But for that not to be a thing, I think that is pretty convincing. Okay.
Yeah, I would have to probably agree with Brian on this, in the sense that, my experience is relatively limited in this regard, mainly just because I never thought about it, never had to think about it. It was never a topic of conversation. It wasn't something anybody ran around talking about when I was growing up, to be honest. But I think you can certainly look historically at the things that were being fought for in the 60s and the things that are being fought for now. To go from a time where you couldn't vote, you couldn't buy a house, you couldn't do any number of things, to going, well, I don't know that I want to show an ID when I vote. Those are very different things to be worried about. I'm not saying let's not care about the voter ID stuff. That's great. That's because racism just shifts, and so they just try new tricks every now and then.
Right.
At least the tricks are becoming a lot smaller and dumber, and there's at least that going on.
Right, at least you can recognize it as a trick immediately.
Right, and it's just the consequences of it are way smaller than saying you just can't vote, get out of here.
Right.
And so now I do like the fact that now you're the asshole if you're racist, when back then that was just the norm. There's something positive in that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Big Dave.
Well, I think I have a different perspective than anybody else on the panel because I'm so much older.
Yeah.
And Brainmaster's boss, DW, and I grew up in a town where in the courthouse there were still black and white fountains. So we come from that time growing up in Northeast Missouri, where we had one black family in town, and he worked at the paper. They were a nice family there. They didn't have any problems by anybody. We had a university there where we did have, back in those days, we had a lot of Iranian students now. We didn't like them that much, to be honest with you, and because they weren't a pleasant people to be around for the most part. We found very few of them being accommodating to even carrying on a conversation with anybody. So we had a certain amount of prejudices there. So my point being is that we've come from that time where we had that in that microcosm of that town now, where we have several black families. We have many black families that live there and come from a rather multiracial town because they have the university there. They also have a medical university there, and A.T. Still University. And it's just come a long way from that point. And that's what I've seen, is that I look among my friends on how many of my friends are African American and how successful they are, and how far we've been able to come since those days, in that they've been able to reach out and get their educations, which is always difficult, especially if you go up in a public school to get a decent education, and become successful people in America and be accepted widely just for the man which is Dr. King's dream anyway, for the man or woman that they are, not because of their skin color. They're just a successful American. And I think that impact on what we have going on is the most positive thing we have, because you can look around and see a ton of that anymore. We have, they're leaders in our government, they're leaders and CEOs of our companies, you know, and so that's the most positive thing that we've managed to get done. However, I do feel if Dr. King was sitting with us here today, I think he would have one comment. He would say, "Good God Almighty, it's cold. I'm going back to Atlanta."
He may say just that, because it is cold. You know, I've been kind of chewing with this particular question all day, because there are so many things that I think have changed for the better. You know, I think about, you know, my grandparents who grew up in small town Mississippi, and you know, basically fled the South to come up north and you know, find good jobs. My grandfather, he, you know, became a cement finisher, and you know, he had his own little company doing that, Bacon and Sons, and which is hilarious because I don't know if any of my uncles actually worked there any length of time, but you know, going from, you know, kind of just leaving the South to later in life, they wound up buying a 3-flat apartment building, which actually my aunt still owns now, to, you know, and you know, them, you know, having to, you know, in the South, having to, you know, stop and say something polite and get out of the way and let, you know, white people walk past, to being able to be in traffic and honk and curse out the car next to you, and there's no reprisal for that, whether or not of your race. We've come a long way. Come a long way, and you know, and I am definitely proud of the strides we have made as a country as a whole. Now, you brought it up as a joke, but I really was wrestling with this question kind of seriously. If Martin Luther King was still alive, what would he say about the America today? 2, would America look the way it looks today if he was still alive? Because I'm not 100% sure one way or the other if it would look differently. But let's say it doesn't look any different and he's still alive. What would he have to say about comments like these people from these shithole countries and all of the other myriads of comments and slanders on our former president? But the fact that you know, a black man rose to the highest office in the land, you know, like, how could he not be overjoyed with that, just that alone?
Black woman was Secretary of State.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
I mean,
Colin Powell.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've made tremendous steps in many ways like that.
So, is there one thing that you think that Dr. King would be like, what the, if he was still alive?
I don't know if there's one specific thing he'd be, you know, up in arms about. I mean, I think I'm a lot more optimistic about the future, and I think he would be too, considering how far we've come. And I mean, 50 years is not a very long time to come to where we're at now. So in 50 years,
actually, I actually agree.
Yeah, just a little 50 years now, we got the right to vote, first black president. I mean, the celebrities, I mean, he was talking about successful people from different backgrounds. Just there's a lot more, even with the upcoming generation, they're so colorblind, it's ridiculous now. So there's a lot more to be optimistic about. I think he'll still stick to maybe the generation in which he grew up that's still alive and still pushing the agenda of race and being separate more so than anything else. And I think that's just a constant reminder of, and we need that reminder, just to how far we come and where our history kind of led us to this point, and what made people become so hell bent on changing, making those kind of changes. The fear now, I wouldn't say it's a fear, but the question is, do we have anybody that's willing, black, white, Hispanic, whatever, willing to step up and make those kind of stances consistently and be as dedicated to a cause? We have the Colin Kaepernick. He took a knee, he lost his job, but it's still kind of quiet with what's going on after the fact. So who's the next person when these kind of injustices happen? I mean, who's the next person that steps up?
Yeah. What do you think, Bray Mass?
I think that's an awesome thing to think about. Who's going to be the next person and who's it going to be for? Hopefully it's no longer. Hopefully we can get to a point someday where it's just about human rights. It's really interesting, right? I mean, they're looking at folks that are being deported that have been here. I just read one earlier today. This guy had lived here for 30 years, is married, and has kids, and they're like, "Yep, he's deported today," and they made the headline because of what today is. So it's just, so we still have some ways to go. It'd be interesting to hear what he would have to say if he were sitting here, but I think he would absolutely still be criticized by a portion of the population, which is something I think everyone should think about.
O'Connor?
This is a hard one for me because I think back in the 60s, it would have been really easy to point to, I guess what you call white society, and go, dude, stop fucking with us. Right. Cut it out. Like, really not voting, not buying a house. That's basic fundamental civil rights stuff. Now I feel like it's getting to the point, or in danger of getting to the point, where it's becoming mixed and people are looking for things to be upset and call racist that are not. And I think it's kind of like the Me Too thing. It's almost getting to the point where it's starting to reverse back on itself. And people are like, this is getting a little silly. So, I mean, you can make the argument, and I'm all in favor of letting the DACA kids stay. I'm a big believer in that, but the argument is about illegal immigration. They are here illegally. Nobody doubts that. It's just a matter of should we let them stay or not. So it's, again, a lot of times with these crazy-ass white cops running around, well, nobody's denying the fact that a lot of times they're responding to actual crimes. It's just that they're overreacting to the crimes. So it's clouding an issue that's hard. And I also think one of the questions back is, white America generally thinks, well, we're done with racism once you guys have completely assimilated into white America. Which I think is a very silly thing to do. How do you maintain African American culture, and all those kinds of things, and not separate out what the differences that make us better, and yet still have it be a harmonious kind of thing? That's going to be the trick of where it goes next, I think. So, I mean, just from what I know we struggled to name 3 famous people who weren't athletes a second ago, and it's sad that we just had to name 3 people, to come up with. There's tons of people, should be tons of people, and should be a lot more, but it still seems relegated to entertainment, athletics, and that's kind of where it's at. That's a cycle that has to break. And not all of that is just white people forcing that on there. Yeah. Some of that is an internal culture that, celebrates those kinds of things. So, I don't know. That's going to be the big challenge going forward.
Yeah, I definitely see merits in what you're saying, because it's definitely, yes, as You know, as Kanye said on one of his records, you know, racism's still alive. They just be concealing it. You know, it's still here. You know, but I do feel like sometimes people, you know, now a phrase I do hate. I hate the phrase "playing the race card," because generally it's said to discredit people who probably are legitimately calling something racial that is. But I do think sometimes people call things racist that aren't racist. They're just, like you say, it's a structure that's set up that does not favor black people. It wasn't necessarily racist when it was set up. It's just a structure that doesn't necessarily favor black people because of our population size. We're only 12, 13% of the population if you really think about it. So, but, you know, I don't want to get to a point where people are saying, oh, you know, it's you know, that, you know, it's not racist. Sometimes it is. But I definitely don't want to be at a place where we're nitpicking everything. You know, it's like somebody's an asshole to you. Oh, you're racist. They were an asshole. Like, let's just say what it was first. You know, did they call you a black son of a bitch, or did they just call you a son of a bitch? because those are two different things. So, I mean, you know, it kind of big day.
Well, I think you're right. The word racist is a strong, strong term. And to bandy it about too recklessly can be very, very bad.
Yeah.
You know, we saw that in the last election when they really used that word too much, and it's just kind of like, look, you know, like I mean,
I don't know if
somebody's an asshole.
I don't know if they use it too much though. I mean, honestly, because he keeps proving that he's a racist. Well, it would be different if
he's making his own case.
Yeah, like he's making his own.
And I'm not talking about Trump so much.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, not everybody.
I'm talking about in general use when you're talking about general people. The mainstream media in particular loves to stir their shit. And this is how they stir their shit sometimes. They'd be able to get a reaction, be able to keep the 24-hour news cycle rolling. You know, they use things. I'm going to go back to something. You know, the last time we had the Martin Luther King Jr. podcast, I talked about the letters from the Birmingham jail, and I wonder how many young people have actually read that. Where he had 8 white clergy worried about that he was, bringing forth a protest a little too strong. And I read an interesting article today. I was going to quote a couple of things here. The right to protest for right, King maintained, is both a natural human right and a precious American inheritance, because we are a free country.
Absolutely.
And we do have to say that. Absolutely. The spirit of righteous resistance is among the virtues of American character. Yet, like other such quality, it loses its virtuous character when it is carried into the extreme. Those of our own day who feel themselves moved by this spirit would do well to learn this lesson from King's letter. Resistance loses its righteousness when it ceases to be governed by the virtues of moderation and prudence. So, I think if Dr. King was here today, he would not be happy with some of like what happened to Ferguson with the rioting and things. There's other ways to make your point. It needs to be done in a peaceful way. If you look back upon the riots, the resistance and the protest that they had in Montgomery and their civil rights use, they did not get violent. They were hit with water cannons. They had dogs turned on them. They had unbelievable things, and the people kept to their righteous protest for the virtue of what they knew, that they needed equality regardless of who they were. That's a powerful thing, and I really think that overall message has been lost among a lot of people nowadays. And we all know there's the hustlers out there. They just like to stir the shit so they can make their money off of it. I'm not a friend of Al Sharpton or even Jesse Jackson in that way, because they are able to come in and say, hey, I got publicist company that can turn around and make this better. You know, I'll make this go away if you turn around and use my company. That's not what Dr. King was looking for. And I think if he was still alive today, he would look at those people and say, this is not how you do things. I know, and I've said this before, and you guys know it. I think Dr. King was one of the top 5 people in America that has ever lived. I mean, he really, really, really understood what his purpose of trying to get equality and civil rights for people were, and he went about it in the right way. And I think that I look at a lot of things and a lot of the protest movements nowadays, I don't think he'd be happy with them. I just can't see it.
Well, I will say this, because I was really listening to what you were just saying, and the only kind of counterpoint I'll have to it is Dr. King himself famously called riots the language of the unheard.
Yes, he did.
So
that's in this article, Bob.
So, no, I don't think that once again, we're getting back to, everything being racist or everything. There are some situations that without, let me start it like this. I do agree that in Dr. King's era, peaceful protest was probably the most effective tool of change.
It was actually stunningly effective.
Yeah, but I will say this, and historically, for America, some things can't change without violent end. We would not have come out of slavery, with just the Emancipation Proclamation. We had to fight the Civil War. So sometimes a riot is the language of the unheard. Sometimes you have to violently demonstrate in order for people to realize, oh, it's fucked up. Oh, I misunderstood what you were saying. And that does not mean that I like violent protests. We always talk about at home. We see the riots and we see the looting and the property destruction, and we're just like, okay, I don't understand. Because a lot of times you're burning down your own neighborhoods, but it's oftentimes, if you go back to the 90s and 92 in LA, so not only were the cops in LA just over the top with their treatment of the African American constituents, but also the reason that they burned a lot of the stores was because they couldn't even go in the corner store in their own neighborhood without the Vietnamese or whoever owned it following them around the store literally until they got their carton of milk and left. And after a while, I remember this interview with Tupac, and he was saying, over time, the song gets stronger. So you start with you get a homeless, hungry person, and they're walking past this restaurant, and they look inside, and they just see a party, and it's ridiculous, and they're throwing food, and he's outside starving, and he goes and he knocks on the door very politely, and and he says, I am hungry, please let me in. And they're like, man, shut up. And said, so then the next time they come past, it's, look, I am hungry, please let me in. And he says, after 5 or 6 times, is, I'm kicking in the door and I'm picking a lock and I'm gonna smack somebody. Because after a while, you're obviously not being heard. So the song gets stronger, the song gets louder, the song gets more aggressive because you're not being heard. So there on certain levels, I agree with what you're saying, but I never look at protesters who feel they have to go that far as they're wrong, because if you've never been just walking to the corner store and the police throw you up against the wall and pat you down and what are you doing while you're out here? If that's never happened to you, you don't fully understand these people's lives. And even if it's happened to you once, but I think most people at the table would think I'm probably one of the most affable people you might know. I've been thrown against the wall 4 or 5 times in my life for absolutely no reason. Walking to the corner store to get my grandfather a pack of Philip Morris Commanders. And I didn't have it bad. I'm from that area of town, but I personally didn't have it bad as half the kids that I knew. So, so I understand it, even though I don't necessarily agree with it. And so to me, it's all about finding the places of understanding so that we can get to the level where we're just talking about human and we're not talking about color. Because honestly, in 1,000 ways, I'm over it. Like I don't want to be talking about race. I want to be trying to figure out how to move forward in life and upward in life. And I don't want race to be a part of that conversation. But as long as race is a part of that conversation, I also have to try and understand why it still is.
Well, I'll say this about my older generation. We thought that we had really made a lot of progress. And with all the things that happened in Ferguson and Baltimore, we're somewhat confused. As I talk among my contemporaries, my white contemporaries, we're going, what happened? We thought that, we've been accepting of this, and we're an older generation because we came from under what Jim Crow was. We knew what it was. We saw what it was, and we've seen the progress that we made. And we're going, what's happening? Why do we feel like it's regressing again? We're having some trouble understanding this, quite frankly, because we're going, we've accepted this. We're cool with it, and we don't understand, why it's kind of being even thrown back on us somewhat. We're going, I don't get this, and I'm serious about this. Is almost all of my contemporaries.
I think the real problem
we're really struggling with this in our minds.
I get that.
It's very distressing to us.
Yeah. Well, I think the problem is so everybody out there in podcast land, just so you know, this is intergenerational, interracial, intergender, usually roundtable. And the thing that I still struggle with is why is that rare? That shouldn't be, not in 2018. But I think what happens is, or what had happened was, people didn't stop feeling the way they were feeling, they just stopped saying it. And somehow or another, especially with having a black president in office for 8 years, everybody that stopped saying how they felt like they needed to start saying how they felt again, which of course kicked up the counter, and so I'm a firm believer that that wild animals are the most ferocious right before they die, because they're fighting for that last bit of life, last bit of oxygen. And I think that's what the kind of racist factions in this country are doing now. At least that's what I really want to believe.
But they're such a minority anymore, really, compared to what they used to be. I really believe that.
I thought I believed that.
I still believe
I'm
that.
not 100% sure if I fully believe it.
I still believe that. It's just that the media loves to grab them and throw them out like they're the main part of the population. And
I don't think they're the main part of the population, but I think they may be larger than we want to believe that they are.
I don't think they are. I don't think they are.
Well, Charlottesville said that it's probably a lot more than we thought previously, because I guess we all were thinking the same thing. Like, oh, okay, this is not as bad as it once was. Has it come a long way? Absolutely. But then you see some 20-something-year-old kid with a tiki torch, just talking about a statue for somebody who doesn't know. So,
And they feel okay to speak that way.
yeah. So
Is part of the problem.
that's where it got confusing to us, because we were like, oh, well, we were thinking the same thing. We knew it's still not like an equal playing field, but damn, then we just when we overall this, the burning torches or carrying, these kind of protests,
Right.
One they're protesting because people are dying in the streets unjustly, unarmed. The system says that, this, according to where we see it, this guy should be arrested, blah, blah, blah. And people just feel they're not getting their due just. And so it starts off peacefully, like Mario was saying, and then it ends very unpeacefully after 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times of seeing it over and over and over of something that was already existing that we thought we got rid of.
Yeah.
But
Well, I'll say this. I lived down Southeast Texas for a while in the late 70s, and that was KKK down there. And I would have to say there probably still is that faction there. Absolutely. They were a strong presence. I would like to think that hopefully they're not as strong as they used to be.
Yeah.
I think the world's evolved a little bit more, but we all knew down there, and of course, you guys all know my story. I got beat pretty severely by the cops, by sheriff's deputies. But they don't like you down there. They have their own ways, and it was not a pretty picture. And
I tell you, as far as like KKK, I grew up in Chicago, and of course, I didn't run into many KKKs, but there was a lot of talk about, don't get caught out there bad too far into Indiana, because Muncie, Indiana is one of the most active KKK, regimes in the country, and I was actually looking at a thing today. They said when they first were starting the KKK in Muncie, they said they were signing up people so fast that they ran out of robes 4 times, just trying to get people robes to be a part of it. So they were just putting on like just a little mask over their eyes, because that's all they could get them, because they were signing people up so fast. And of course, we're talking about the 50s and 60s, but I guess what I'm saying is there are pockets of the country, south and north, that it's very real to be anything other than a white person. So you have to be on your square all the time, and it bothers me that in my lifetime it was, hey, don't get caught out there too bad in Indiana, because it's
But you know what racism is? It's ignorance.
Absolutely.
That's what racism is. It's ignorance.
Absolutely.
And there's no excuse for ignorance.
Absolutely.
If you are a narrow-minded fool, there's no reason to be that way. If you can't turn around and take another man or woman for their face value, if you don't like them, you don't like them for their face value, not due to the color of their skin.
I fully agree. I will say this before I end this segment. There was a quote by Dr. King that I saw today that I thought was really good, and I really wanted to cap off this show because, like I say, I think we could talk for a long time about this subject, but it's really cold. And
I said, Dr. King went back to Atlanta already.
yeah, really, exactly. So the quote is, darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. So,
Can I add one more thing?
sure.
Podcast land. Go read Dr. King.
Absolutely.
Go read Dr. King's.
Yeah,
Missies.
we can only give.
You will learn from him.
Yeah, we can only give a glimmer to his words up here, but yeah, go and read some of the speeches of the great Dr. King and learn what it is to love, even when it doesn't seem like you're being loved. Because
Well said.
with all that, we'll be right back. Hey, you having a good time? Let me introduce you to a couple of my media brothers. First, www.americathemixtape.com, a cipher on American politics, society, and culture. And where'd I get that mixtape? Of course, www.cornerbodega.us, purveyors of urban culture. Come on, let's get back to the party. All right, and we are back. And before we get out of here, let's talk about today's sugar honey iced tea. And for those that don't know, these are things that I or a member of the group have found that are really cool, aka the shit. And today, we've got one big sugar honey iced tea, and that is remembering your mistakes. For those out there in podcast land that are history buffs, it says, that old saying is, if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. And I always like to think, if you don't learn from your mistakes, you're doomed to make them again. So on this Martin Luther King Day, I just want to say that everybody out there in podcast land and all of America, we have been down this road before. Let us strive for light and love and remember the mistakes of darkness and hate so that we don't repeat any of these mistakes again. Because I personally feel that I have benefited and am enriched by friendships that go across age lines, they go across color lines, they go across gender lines, and I have learned from and hopefully teach things just through my manner to all of those people as well. And with that, I'm going to end this podcast in the way I end all podcasts, and that is to good times with good people.
Mario, it's one of the most profound things you ever said.